Hey guys, Elyot here from Prismata, and today I'm just going to give you a little quick video to answer some questions we've had about our recent balance patch. So, as I'm sure many of you guys are aware, last weekend we deployed the biggest balance patch we've ever had in Prismata. There were over a dozen units changed. We added 3 new units, Savior, Ferritin Sac, and Lance-Tooth, which I hope you're all enjoying. Savior has created some really epic, interesting games, and I hope you're enjoying that. Ferritin Sac, I apologize that MasterBot is really bad at it right now. We're working on it. We'll get there. Lance-Tooth, of course, a very interesting tactical unit as well. That's not really what I wanted to talk about. I more wanted to talk about some of the balance changes that we put in, some of the more experimental ones, and maybe some future changes that will also be happening. So first of all, a little bit about our philosophy in balancing Prismata and running an alpha. We want to have the freedom to make whatever changes we feel are necessary in order to improve the game. And during the alpha, if you guys are playing in the alpha, you're kind of our guinea pigs, meaning, we do lots of internal testing. When we make a change, we do try to vet it internally to make sure we're not releasing stuff that's broken. But ultimately, a lot of the most broken things are going to be found by you guys, our players. A lot of the changes that we have made or have been made in the past were suggestions from our players, or were changes that were made as a result of feedback that we get from players during the alpha. So the alpha plays a vital role in us moving more and more toward the optimal level of balance that we ultimately want to see in Prismata. So we expect to make mistakes. We expect to release units that turn out to be broken. We expect to get the balance wrong a few times until we need to get it right. And, we're willing to make those changes. The fact that people don't own units and don't have to collect cards means we can be much more liberal in buffing or nerfing things as necessary. So we will do that. And I said to Will and some of the other team members probably around Friday before we released the patch, I think at least one of Redeemer, Venge, Scorchilla, or Grenade Mech is probably going to have to get changed, because they were all, for each of those units we made a change that aggressively costed the unit and perhaps opened up some additional lines of play that could be too much. And we expect that maybe one of them will have to get changed, maybe more than one, I don't know. Xeno Guardian, actually, we had it at 4 plus a blue and a green internally for most of the test period. And and this is in nerfing it from 7 plus a blue and a green, but adding a nerf of 1 build time, but reducing the cost, so sort of a buff plus a nerf. And we originally had it at 4 plus a blue and a green because we thought that, people don't tend to buy Xenos as just a basic attacker. They often just get 1 and kind of defend with it. And maybe we could try and price it a bit more aggressively because it's worse as a defender because of the build time. And evidently not. It seemed to be quite strong at 4 plus a blue and a green. And I mean, you might expect that looking at the unit and how good it is and its cost. But oftentimes we want to try things that seem a little bit crazy just to see how crazy they actually are. So Xeno went from a 4 to a 5. Pretty much like the day before we did the patch, like maybe about 2 days before, we said, well, we better tone it back to a 5. And of course at 5, it still gets bought. It's still pretty good. So Redeemer had the reverse. Redeemer originally, when we made the new Redeemer, it was actually 7 green, green, blue, and it was awful. It was terrible. You would lose every time you bought it. And so we tried improving it to 6, and it felt a little bit better. And then we tried it at 5. And, we essentially wanted to price it as aggressively as possible such that it wasn't broken. And I think I sort of felt like, maybe 5.5 is the optimal cost. 5.5 green, green, blue rather than 5. So 5 is a bit low. It certainly allows for some very strong openings. And, we didn't... A lot of people said, oh, it's busted, player 2 wins Redeemer. And we definitely checked that internally. And we found that, no, it's an interesting game if you do a Redeemer rush. The opponent can counter rush. There's all kinds of things that can happen. I don't think it's auto win level, but some people said, well, maybe if you have Infusion Grid, there's not too much player 1 can do. And, we looked at a lot of Redeemer lines, and I do think it's very strong. And we got a lot of complaints about it. So here's what's going to happen. I think ultimately you can't stand at 5 plus 2 greens and a blue. It's just too volatile. And so tomorrow is the 3rd round of the Grand Prix. And, it's the Alpha Grand Prix, which means you guys are going to have to play with units that are maybe broken, and maybe it'll be right after a patch. And, we expect our players to have to deal with that. And we don't have cash prizes, to be fair. So we're not trying to make it too abusable and crazy. But, there will from time to time be some crazier units in the Grand Prix. But we don't want it to be too extreme. So we're actually going to remove Redeemer from Prismata effective immediately. And so it won't be available as a unit during the Grand Prix round. We will reinstate Redeemer later this week, and it will either be at a 6 green blue cost, or if, we'll have some internal discussions and determine whether or not we're going to do something else. And we do have a backup plan if the Redeemer that generates 3 waves of Gauss charges for your opponent doesn't work at all and just can't be made to work, we can't find a good version of it, then we do have some other options, like, for example, a Redeemer that produces more Gauss charges in the later turns rather than the early turns, or just maybe 1 big volley, but 2 or 3 turns delayed. There's all kinds of different things we can do with the unit. Redeemer in and of itself is a notoriously difficult and complex unit to balance because of the fact that it's so undercosted, but your opponent gets this beneficial wave of Gauss charges that help them. And it puts Redeemer in a situation where it can be super, super good in some situations and just really bad in others. And that's what makes it a tricky unit to get right. And, we're going to spend the time necessary to get a version of Redeemer that we feel is good and contributes to the game and contributes to diversity of openings and allows different strategies to work. We'll work on the unit until we get it. So that's the plan with Redeemer. The other units I mentioned, Venge Cannon, Scorchilla, Grenade Mech, we haven't found anything super broken yet since deploying it. Nobody's come to us and said, player 2 wins with Scorchilla. Nothing like that. We've mostly had good feedback on those ones. I should take a moment to address Venge Cannon. We really did intend, when we originally designed Venge Cannon, for it to be an all-in type of unit where you can sacrifice a lot of drones, make Venge Cannons, and that was always the idea of the unit. And we nerfed it many months ago because certain all-in rushes were too good, and that sort of metamorphosized Venge Cannon into a value unit where you would make a Venge Cannon and then you would spend green over a few turns to activate its ability, and the ability was a high value ability, and it sort of changed what Venge Cannon was, because if you went all in, the ability was a much less high value ability because the HP of your Venge Cannon mattered too much. So we wanted to bring Venge Cannon back to more of the all-in type of unit that it was before, because we felt it was more fun and offered a more diverse set of strategies rather than just a regular old attacker that had some kind of tie-in with your green economy. So that's our goal with Venge. It is a different flavor of unit than you guys have probably been used to with the latest Venge, but it is intentional. And we basically just want to see whether or not it's too broken. If it's too broken, we'll nerf it by a gold, probably. But we do want Venge all-ins to be a thing. So what's the next thing? Chieftain. So let's talk about Chieftain, because we got a whole lot of questions about Chieftain. Why did you nerf Chieftain and not Doomed Mech and not Grimbotch? And this is something that we ourselves didn't really get around to figuring out until recently, because we saw the stats. Chieftain is a unit that is bought a lot. It is bought a lot of times in games when it is bought, more so than Doomed Mech. And, it was a unit that a lot of players felt was very powerful, but its price is about the same as Doom Mech's, like the old price, which was 7, 2 greens, and a blue. That's very similar to the 8 and 2 blue for a Doomed Mech. And they're a similar type of unit. The Chieftain has 2 more HP versus the Doom Mech having 2 more lifespan, plus not being fragile as a benefit. Maybe you can look at the blue in Doom Mech as a sort of tech prerequisite cost that is a higher threshold than the Chieftain. But that's kind of offset by, we always make the blue and triple blue units very tough and bulky so that Doom Mech's ability to defend is kind of made up for the fact that it's a blue unit. So we sort of see that as balancing out. But in terms of the raw value of the unit, is Chieftain, the old Chieftain, was it actually a better unit than Doomed Mech? And the answer is quite complicated. It's sort of yes and no. If you break Chieftain down into sort of an attacking portion and a defending portion, Chieftain is actually primarily a defender. The fact that it absorbs 7 damage that your opponent will deal to you at some point is highly relevant in a lot of games, and it's a very powerful defender. And defense in Prismata is actually priced a different way than attack is. Defense is generally more expensive because we want games to end. We want attack to ultimately win. So if you compare a unit like Infusion Grid, which is 5 plus a blue for 4 defense next turn, versus Chieftain, which is like the old Chieftain, 7 and 2 greens and a blue for 7 defense next turn, and you just look at the ratio of amount of butt next turn versus cost, the old Chieftain was actually better than Infusion Grid, which is kind of insane. Now, Infusion Grid has a benefit in being non-fragile, so you can absorb with it. But even when you're not absorbing with an Infusion Grid and you're just buying one to sacrifice it next turn, it's incredibly efficient. It's one of the better defenders you can buy in Prismata that isn't prompt. And Chieftain is all that, plus you can attack with it twice. So from that standpoint, Chieftain is very, very good. And so if you break Chieftain down into its attacking portion and its defending portion, we were actually really underpricing the defending portion because we never kind of considered that the defending portion should be priced less efficiently to more coincide with the fact that other defense in Prismata is expensive. And so when we computed the sort of cost per unit value of Chieftain and Doom Mech and other units, we weren't applying the premium that we normally apply to defenders to Chieftain's defensive portion. And if you compare that to Doomed Mech and Grimbotch, they still have great defensive capabilities, but they are less of an overall fraction of the unit's value than Chieftain. Like a typical Chieftain, you maybe attack with it twice and then defend with it, so it's like 4 damage and then 7 defense. Whereas Doom Mech, you might attack with it like 4 times and do 8 damage and then 5 defense. Grimbotch sort of similarly, you would attack with it 3 times and then defend for 2 or something like that. So Chieftain is almost twice as much defense as attack, and those other units are mostly twice as much attack as defense. So being consistent with the way that we price defense in the rest of Prismata, Chieftain actually deserves to be more expensive. And that kind of coincides with the way we want games of Prismata to play out, because we saw it in games. When Chieftain was getting bought, often players would buy all 10, and they would buy 1 every turn, and they would attack with it twice, and they would defend with it. And so you'd build up this Chieftain train, which, attack, attack, defend, and you're timing it so you can buy 1 Chieftain a turn, and you're using them highly efficiently. But what it does is it drags on the game of Prismata for sort of a couple more turns than we really want it to, especially in these big economic sets, because it takes forever to get through your opponent's defenses, because those defenses are just a little bit undercosted. So that is our reasoning behind why we nerfed Chieftain and not Doomed Mech. And we actually had to update some of our models in how we price things because of learning this and realizing this and coming to understand that we had not been correct in the way we priced Chieftain. And we've made a lot of mistakes before in the way that we priced units. The old Savior was way too expensive for a long time. The Savior that we just brought back is hopefully a little bit better. But as developers working on a game that really hasn't existed until this point, we've had to sort of blaze our own trail and make our own models to learn how to price things and cost them, and we're constantly updating them based on the feedback we get from you guys, of course from all of our players, our testers, us playing ourselves on the ladder and witnessing tournaments and seeing what players are doing. And hopefully through this process, we will be able to make Prismata into a better game. So I guess the last thing I want to say is please keep your feedback coming. All of the complaints and the whining about the units, it's the most useful thing you can possibly do for us. We read everything that gets posted on the subreddit. When you use the balance feedback in Prismata itself, we read every little bit, and we don't always agree with everything everybody says about a unit, but we do take it into consideration, and we spend a lot of time talking to players and testing things and really trying to learn what decisions we can make as designers to turn Prismata into the best possible game we can. So thank you again for your continued help in making us do this. And I hope to see you on the ladder, and I hope you'll get to hang out with me tomorrow when we do round 3 of the Grand Prix. And there will be no Redeemer, unfortunately. So Until then, I will see you guys around.